I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for exactly 23 minutes after my pinning ceremony ended. I was still wearing my stiff white uniform, the fabric pristine and heavy with the weight of 3 years of relentless suffering, and I was still holding the little ceremonial candle they had given each of us at the end of the stage walk. The flame had gone out somewhere between the bright, overwhelming lights of the main auditorium and the lonely, silent ride down the service elevator. I kept staring at the blackened wick anyway, rubbing my thumb over the cheap wax. The hospital parking garage was a cavern of echoing concrete, flickering fluorescent lights, and the distant hum of city traffic, but inside my rusted sedan, the silence was absolute and deafening. My phone screen lit up the dark interior of my car, casting a harsh blue glow across my face. I had 42 notifications. My classmates were tagging me in blurry photos, my shift manager from the diner had sent a congratulatory text, and even my landlord had wished me well. But as I scrolled through the endless stream of names, my chest tightened. Not a single one of those 42 notifications was from my mother. Not one was from my father. Instead, an old text message from 3 days ago echoed in my mind, burning a hole straight through my ribcage. My mother's voice had been so incredibly casual, so terribly annoyed when she delivered the final blow over the phone. "Don't be so dramatic, Vesper. It's just a safety pin. Your sister's casting is the ticket to a better life for all of us. We cannot miss this for a school assembly." A school assembly. That was what she called 3 years of literal blood, sweat, 12-hour clinical shifts, and surviving on cheap instant noodles. That was what she called the moment I officially transitioned from a struggling student to a registered nurse. I pressed my forehead against the cold, hard plastic of the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the dashboard glass. The metal of the medical pin, which I had just received, dug sharply into the palm of my hand. I had pinned my own badge on my uniform in the cracked bathroom mirror of my apartment before the ceremony even started. I did it completely alone, my hands shaking as I pushed the needle through the thick white fabric. I cried in that parking lot until my throat felt like sandpaper. It was the kind of deep, ugly sobbing that hollows you out from the inside, the kind that makes your lungs burn and your vision blur. I wept for the little girl who used to bring home straight-A report cards only to be told to keep quiet because her sister was practicing her pageant walk in the hallway. I wept for the young woman who had worked 2 minimum-wage jobs just to afford her medical textbooks, completely unsupported by the people who brought her into this world. But as the tears finally slowed and stopped, a strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Because tucked safely inside the pocket of my white uniform was a folded piece of thick, watermarked paper. A contract. A secret so massive it was about to change the trajectory of my entire existence and destroy the illusion my family had built. To understand how I ended up sitting alone in a dark concrete garage on the most important day of my professional life, you need to deeply understand the toxic dynamics of the house I grew up in. I was the invisible child. If you are reading this and you grew up as the background character in your own family, you know exactly the kind of house I am talking about. You know the crushing silence that follows your achievements. You know the overwhelming, deafening noise that greets the golden child's every single breath. My sister, Delphine, is 21 years old. She calls herself a freelance model. In reality, she spends her days scrolling endlessly through social media, entering obscure local beauty pageants that charge exorbitant entry fees, and going to sketchy casting calls that lead to absolutely nothing but empty promises and predatory photographers. But to my parents, Orson and Rowena, Delphine is a supernova waiting to be discovered. Her beauty is their ultimate retirement plan. Her potential fame is their desperate ticket out of middle-class mediocrity. Everything in our lives revolved around her dietary needs, her intricate skincare routines, and her sudden, violent emotional breakdowns whenever an agency did not reply to her desperate emails. I, on the other hand, was just Vesper. The quiet one. The pragmatic one. The one who worked grueling hours cleaning up spilled milkshakes at a local diner and steaming milk at a campus coffee shop just to pay for my nursing tuition. I was the one they never had to worry about, which in their twisted minds, translated directly into the one they never had to care about. Let me take you back to the auditorium, just 2 hours before I found myself sobbing in the car. The room was packed with 400 nursing graduates and their extended families. The air was thick with the smell of cheap perfume, expensive bouquets of roses, and the overwhelming buzz of collective pride. When the dean called a name, a whole row of people would stand up, cheering at the top of their lungs, waving customized balloons, and crying genuine tears of joy. I watched fathers engulf their daughters in massive bear hugs. I watched mothers lovingly fix their sons' collars before they walked up the steps. I sat in my assigned seat, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles turned white, trying desperately to swallow the massive lump in my throat. When it was my turn, I walked across that vast, polished wooden stage. The spotlight was blinding, making the crowd look like a blurry ocean of faces. I scanned the sea of people, my eyes darting frantically, looking for one specific person. I was not looking for my parents. I knew they were 3,000 miles away in a cramped hotel room in Los Angeles, probably fetching alkaline water bottles for Delphine while she waited in line for a casting call she would never book. I was looking for Aunt Althea. And there she was, sitting right in the third row, exactly where she promised she would be. My mother's older sister, a woman who lived a fiercely independent life shaping clay pottery in her quiet rural studio, had driven 4 grueling hours with a bad hip just to be there for me. When they called my name over the loudspeakers, Aunt Althea stood up. She did not just politely clap like a distant relative. She cheered so loudly her voice cracked and echoed through the hall. "That is my Vesper," she yelled. I saw her aggressively wipe her eyes with the back of her clay-stained hand. For a split second, looking at her standing there completely alone in a sea of massive, boisterous families, I felt a surge of profound love mixed with a devastating sense of grief. She was my only village. She was the only one who saw me. I walked off the stage, shook the program director's hand, and went back to my seat. I survived the rest of the agonizing tower ceremony by staring blankly at the acoustic ceiling tiles, counting the little perforated holes to keep the tears from falling and ruining my makeup. Now, sitting in the absolute silence of the parking garage, I finally allowed myself to breathe. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the piece of paper. The black ink was crisp. The official letterhead belonged to one of the most prestigious, well-funded Level 1 trauma centers on the entire West Coast. I traced my index finger over the numbers printed clearly on the page. I had not told a single soul about this. Not even Aunt Althea. The boiling anger I had felt toward my parents for the past decade was no longer a hot, blinding rage. It had cooled into something sharp, precise, and incredibly dangerous. A weapon I was finally ready to unsheath. How did a girl who was told her nursing degree was just a school assembly end up holding a contract worth more than her parents' entire suburban house? You are about to find out, and I promise you, the journey is paved with more audacity than you can possibly imagine. My mother, Rowena, possesses a massive, heavy leather-bound binder. It is not just any ordinary binder you would find in an office supply store. It is a meticulously crafted, terrifyingly detailed archive of Delphine's perceived greatness. It sits permanently on the center of the glass coffee table in our living room, acting as a holy shrine to a career that does not actually exist anywhere outside of my mother's delusional mind. Inside that monstrous binder, my mother keeps every single bodily measurement Delphine has ever had, updated on the first of every month with religious devotion. She keeps printed, glossy copies of every cheap local magazine page where Delphine's elbow or shoulder might have been slightly visible in the background of a crowd shot. She keeps elaborate, color-coded spreadsheets of casting dates, extreme diet plans, and lists of high-end modeling agencies they plan to miraculously conquer. Once, during the grueling winter of my second year of nursing school, I received a formal letter from the dean of the medical faculty. I had made the highest honor roll in my entire cohort, scoring perfectly on my pharmacology exams. It was a beautiful, heavy piece of thick cream-colored paper stamped with a shining gold foil seal. I was so incredibly proud. I brought it home and carefully left it right on the center of the kitchen island, hoping, just hoping against all odds, that someone would notice it when they came down for breakfast. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to grab my uniform. I found my certificate flipped over on the granite counter. It was covered in hastily scribbled, messy blue ink. My mother had used the back of my highest academic achievement as scrap paper to write down the phone numbers and price lists of local spray tan salons for Delphine's upcoming swimsuit competition. My achievement, the physical proof of my sleepless nights and intellect, was literal garbage to them. I stood there staring at the blue ink bleeding through the cream paper, and I didn't even say a word. I just folded it up, put it in my backpack, and walked out the door. That was the harsh, undeniable reality of being Vesper. While Delphine lived in a luxurious world of silk robes, $100 organic meal prep deliveries, and endless validation funded entirely by my father's rapidly dwindling credit score, I lived in a universe defined by strict, brutal mathematics. I knew exactly how many miles my old car could go when the orange gas light illuminated on the dashboard. I knew exactly which local grocery store marked down their expiring ground beef and bruised apples on Tuesday evenings just before closing time. I remember one specific, horrific week during my pediatric rotation. I had worked 3 14-hour clinical shifts in a row, dealing with sick, crying children and demanding doctors. My feet were covered in burst blisters, my lower back ached in a way that made it physically hard to pull air into my lungs, and I was completely running out of basic toiletries at my apartment. I stood in the harsh, flickering fluorescent light of a cheap discount pharmacy at midnight, staring blankly at a bottle of generic shampoo and a bottle of generic conditioner. Together, with tax, they cost exactly $7.40. I pulled out my cracked phone and checked my banking app. The screen loaded slowly. I had $12.15 left to my name to last the next 5 days until my diner paycheck cleared. I did the math in my head. If I bought both, I would not have enough money for the bus fare to the hospital if my car broke down, nor would I have enough for food. I slowly put the conditioner back on the dusty shelf. I bought the shampoo and a massive, sodium-filled bag of generic instant noodles. That same evening, I dragged myself through the front door of our family house to pick up some winter coats I had left in the attic. I smelled like hospital sanitizer, stale sweat, and bone-deep exhaustion. Orson, my father, was standing proudly in the driveway holding a giant, ridiculous shiny red bow. Sitting right there on the pavement was a brand-new, fully loaded sports car. It cost over $45,000. He had just co-signed a massive predatory loan to buy it for Delphine. Why? Because she had magically made it past the preliminary regional round of a state-level beauty pageant. She didn't even win the actual title, she just barely scraped into the top 20. But Orson confidently told the neighbors that she needed a car that matched her rapidly rising star status. He claimed she needed to arrive at Los Angeles auditions looking like she was already a highly successful, wealthy model, otherwise the agencies wouldn't take her seriously. I stood frozen on the front lawn, holding my flimsy plastic pharmacy bag containing one single bottle of cheap shampoo and a brick of dry noodles, watching them celebrate. Delphine was shrieking at the top of her lungs, hugging the leather steering wheel, while my mother filmed the entire pathetic spectacle on her brand-new smartphone, literal tears of joy streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Look at her, Vesper," my father had said, patting my shoulder heavily without actually turning his eyes to look at me. "Your sister is going to be famous. She is going to take care of us all one day. You just wait and see." I didn't argue. I just went upstairs to my small childhood room, locked the wooden door, and ate my dry noodles in absolute silence. I did not ask them for a single dime. I had made a silent, ironclad pact with myself the very day I enrolled in the nursing program. I would do this entirely on my own. When I finally crossed that finish line and got my license, they would not be able to claim a single ounce of my success. They would not get to say they helped me. But the sheer audacity of their delusion knew absolutely no bounds. Just last month, my phone buzzed while I was deep in the middle of a critical study session at the campus library, surrounded by flashcards. It was Rowena. "Vesper, honey," her voice dripped with that fake, sugary sweetness she only ever used when she was about to demand something outrageous. Are you at the diner today? How much cash do you usually make in a weekend shift with tips? I'm studying for my finals, Mom, I whispered, pressing the phone tightly to my ear so the librarian wouldn't hear. Why? Is everything okay? Well, Delphine has this massive gala networking event coming up. Huge opportunity. There are going to be real Hollywood talent scouts there. She found the absolute perfect designer gown, but it's a little out of our budget this month because of her high car payments and the insurance. We just need to borrow $500. You can pick up a few extra night shifts, right? You have to know how to sacrifice for the family, Vesper. She's going to be a star. $500. I closed my eyes. That was my entire month's rent for my shared room. That was my food budget. That was my literal survival. She was asking me to bleed myself dry, to risk eviction and starvation, so her golden child could play dress-up in a dress she would wear exactly one time. I don't have it, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. Oh, stop hoarding your little paychecks, she scoffed loudly, the fake sweetness vanishing instantly into harsh venom. You live so selfishly, Vesper. Always only thinking about your little hospital things and your own life. Fine. We will figure it out without your useless help. She hung up violently. I sat in the quiet library, staring at my open anatomy textbook until the complex diagrams blurred into meaningless shapes. The sheer, suffocating unfairness of it all felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. They saw me as nothing more than a bottomless well they could draw from, yet they aggressively refused to give me a single drop of water in return. If you have ever been the invisible child in your family, if you have ever had to fight tooth and nail for your own basic survival while watching your sibling get handed the entire world on a silver platter, please hit the like button and subscribe. This story is specifically for you. And, trust me, the retaliation I serve them in the end will make every single moment of your own frustration feel incredibly validated. Because the universe has a very funny, ruthless way of balancing the scales, and I was about to become the universe's absolute favorite instrument of karma. The true, undeniable catalyst for the complete destruction of my family ties happened in late February. The winter air outside was brutally biting, howling against the thin windows of my apartment, and the bone-deep exhaustion of my final semester was settling permanently into my muscles. I was standing in my cramped, freezing kitchen, a tiny space I shared with 2 other nursing students just to afford the monthly rent, eating cold leftover tomato pasta directly from a stained plastic container. I had just finished a horrifying double shift at the hospital where a patient had coded, and I simply didn't even have the physical energy to put the food on a ceramic plate or turn on the microwave. My phone, resting on the chipped Formica counter, rang loudly. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the red reject button. Every single time I answered her calls, I had to mentally brace myself for the inevitable emotional toll it would take on me. But it was late, past 9 o'clock, and a small, foolish, deeply ingrained part of me worried that it might actually be a medical emergency regarding my father. Hello. I mumbled wearily around a mouthful of cold, rubbery noodles. Vesper, good, you're awake, Rowena said rapidly. There was a frantic, manic energy in her voice, the exact kind she got whenever Delphine's imaginary career was involved. I am calling to give you a heads up right now so you can't throw a fit and say we didn't tell you in advance. Your father and I are booking flights to Los Angeles tonight. LA? Why? I asked, suddenly feeling a pit form in my stomach. I set the plastic container down on the counter. Phaedra Modeling Agency. She breathed the name like she was speaking of holy scripture. It is an exclusive, highly restrictive invite-only casting call. Delphine finally got noticed by the big leagues. They are looking for fresh faces for a massive national advertising campaign. We absolutely have to be there to support her. It's a multi-day event, Vesper. Networking, private dinners, the whole Hollywood package. This is it. This is her big break. Okay, I said slowly, rubbing my aching temples to ward off a headache. Congratulations to her. That sounds big. When is it? The second weekend of May, she replied casually, as if she were commenting on the weather forecast. The entire world stopped spinning for a second. The cold kitchen floor seemed to drop a full inch beneath my tired feet. I stared blindly at the peeling yellow wallpaper in front of me, trying to process the words she had just spoken. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to control it. "The second weekend of May is my pinning ceremony. It's on Saturday. I told you the exact date 6 months ago." I put it on the calendar in the kitchen at home. There was a heavy, theatrical sigh on the other end of the line. The exact kind of sigh a frustrated parent gives a toddler who is throwing an unreasonable tantrum in the middle of a crowded grocery store. "I knew you were going to make this difficult and make it all about you," Rowena said, her tone hardening into something nasty. "Vesper, we cannot change the date of a professional, high-stakes casting call. The industry doesn't wait for anyone. Your father already put the flights and the luxury hotel on the high-interest credit card. It is entirely non-refundable." "You booked the flights before even talking to me? Before even checking?" My chest felt incredibly tight. I struggled to pull freezing air into my lungs. "Mom, this is my graduation. It is the pinning ceremony. It formally signifies my transition into the medical profession. It is the single most important day of my academic life. I have worked for 3 years for this one day." "Don't be so dramatic, Vesper," she snapped. The words hit me like a physical, violent slap across the face. "It's just a safety pin. A little school assembly for nurses. We can go out to a nice dinner at that cheap Thai place you like when we get back. Your sister's casting is the golden ticket to a better life for all of us. We cannot miss this for a school assembly. You need to stop being so incredibly selfish, grow up, and look at the bigger picture for this family." Selfish. She actually called me selfish. I stood there in the dim, flickering light of my kitchen, the heavy silence stretching out between us across the phone line. I thought about the days I intentionally went hungry so I could afford my mandated white nursing shoes. I thought about the terrifying nights I cried silently in the hospital supply closet because a patient had died holding my hand and I was so emotionally overwhelmed. I thought about the undeniable fact that I had done it all without a single word of encouragement, without a single dollar of support from the 2 people who brought me into this world. "Right," I whispered. My voice sounded hollow, completely devoid of emotion, like it belonged to a ghost. "The bigger picture. We will celebrate when we get back," she repeated quickly, clearly eager to end the conversation now that she had successfully delivered the news and shut down my resistance. "Tell Delphine congratulations if you text her later. Bye." The line went dead. I didn't throw my phone against the wall. I didn't scream into the void. I just carefully placed the device on the counter, walked slowly to the stainless steel sink, leaned over, and violently threw up the cold pasta I had just eaten. The very next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I called Aunt Althea. I didn't even say hello when she picked up the phone. I just said, "They aren't coming to the pinning." "I know, sweetie," Althea said softly. Her voice was like a thick, warm blanket on a freezing day. "Your mother called me bright and early this morning, bragging endlessly about the Los Angeles trip and the agency." I let her talk for about 2 minutes before I told her she was a fool and hung up on her. "I don't know why it hurts so much," I admitted, a single, pathetic tear finally escaping down my cheek. "I knew they were exactly like this. I knew it. I shouldn't be surprised. It hurts because they are your parents, Vesper," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And it is biologically natural to want them to show up for you. But you listen to me carefully right now. You give me the exact time and the address of that auditorium. I will be there." "Oi, it's a 4-hour drive on the highway," I protested weakly, slipping into the familiar Vietnamese term of endearment I used for her since childhood. "Your hip has been bothering you all winter. You can't sit in a car that long." "Do not argue with a stubborn old woman about her own joints," she commanded fiercely. "I will drive 8 hours if I have to. I will walk there. I am not letting you walk across that stage without family in the audience screaming your name. Real family." I pressed my hand hard over my mouth to stifle a loud sob. The contrast was absolutely agonizing. My parents were willing to plunge thousands of dollars further into high-interest debt to fly across the country for a delusional pipe dream, while my aunt was willing to endure hours of physical pain just to watch me receive a tiny piece of metal. That was the exact, defining moment something inside my brain permanently snapped. The thin, frayed tether connecting me to Orson and Rowena broke completely. I realized that crying over their absence was a pathetic waste of my energy. They had made their choice. They had clearly drawn the battle lines. They wanted to worship blindly at the altar of Delphine's delusions? Fine. I would gladly let them. But I would no longer be the quiet, obedient audience for their circus. I wiped my face with a rough paper towel, looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, and made a silent, unbreakable vow. I was going to build a life so high, so financially fortified, and so brilliantly successful that they would never, ever be able to reach me again. And I was going to start immediately. The golden opportunity for my permanent escape did not arrive with a grand fanfare. It came in the absolute middle of terrifying chaos. It was late March, during my final and most intensive clinical rotation in the intensive care unit. The ICU is a very specific kind of purgatory where time ceases to exist entirely, governed only by the rhythmic, hypnotic beeping of heart monitors and the sudden, blood-curdling alarms that signal a human life rapidly slipping away into the void. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a rainy Tuesday. I was shadowing a senior trauma nurse when the dreaded code blue alarm blared violently through the unit. A patient in room 4, a severe, massive trauma victim from a horrific multi-car pileup on the interstate, was crashing hard. His blood pressure plummeted to dangerous depths, and his heart rhythm spiraled wildly into ventricular fibrillation. The tiny hospital room instantly flooded with medical personnel. Panic is highly contagious, even among seasoned professionals, but something strange and inexplicable happens to me when things go catastrophically wrong. My mind goes entirely quiet. The frantic noise fades into white noise. The attending physician, Dr. Kismet, was barking rapid-fire orders. He was a legendary figure in the hospital network, a brilliant but notoriously demanding and terrifying head of the department who routinely made medical residents cry. In the frantic rush to push life-saving medications, a vital intravenous line blew out. The senior nurse fumbled, her gloved hands shaking violently as she tried desperately to re-establish access. Dark red blood was pooling rapidly on the pristine white hospital sheets. "I need access right now or he dies," Dr. Kismet roared, his eyes wide with intensity. Without thinking, without asking for permission from my supervisor, I stepped forward out of the shadows. I grabbed the sterile kit, swabbed the site, and sank the needle into a nearly collapsed, deeply hidden vein with a steady, fluid motion that felt guided by pure, unadulterated instinct. I secured the line, attached the medication flush, and stepped silently back into the corner just as the heavy crash cart arrived to shock his heart. We got the patient back. His rhythm stabilized. The small room smelled heavily of nervous sweat, the sharp metallic tang of blood, and the burnt ozone from the defibrillator paddles. As the exhausted team dispersed to update the charts, Dr. Kismet stopped at the doorway. He slowly turned around, his sharp, calculating eyes scanning the room until they landed squarely on me. "Student," he pointed a blood-specked, gloved finger directly at my chest. "My office. 10 minutes. My stomach dropped to the floor. I thought I was going to be immediately expelled from the nursing program. I thought I had overstepped a massive legal and professional boundary by intervening without direct orders. I spent the next 10 agonizing minutes scrubbing my hands at the sink until the skin was bright red and raw, terrified that my entire career was completely over before it even officially began. When I finally knocked quietly on Dr. Kismet's heavy wooden door, he didn't even look up from his mountain of paperwork. "Sit." I sat on the very edge of the cold leather chair, my heart hammering violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What is your full name?" he asked finally, putting his expensive pen down and steepling his fingers. "Vesper, sir," I replied, trying desperately to keep my voice from shaking. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for stepping in. I saw the line failing and the patient was crashing, and he held up a hand, instantly silencing me. Do you have any idea how many seasoned, 10-year veterans freeze during a messy, bloody code, Vesper? Fear is a natural biological response. But in there, you weren't afraid. You were entirely calculating. You moved like a machine. You moved like someone who has been running traumas for a decade. You have the instinct that cannot be taught in a classroom. He leaned back in his large chair, studying me intently for what felt like an eternity. I have close colleagues on the West Coast. Portland, Oregon. They are launching a highly selective, extremely fast-tracked charge nurse fellowship at one of the premier Level 1 trauma centers in the Pacific Northwest. They want someone fresh, someone brutally hungry, someone who doesn't crack under immense, life-or-death pressure. I am officially recommending you for the position. My jaw physically dropped. Portland? Sir, I haven't even graduated yet. I haven't taken my state board licensing exams. You will pass your boards easily. He stated it as an absolute, undeniable fact, not a question. He slid a sleek, glowing tablet across the wide desk toward me. A secure email was open on the screen. This is the preliminary offer based entirely on my direct, personal endorsement. Read it carefully. I leaned forward, squinting slightly, and looked at the bright screen. My eyes rapidly scanned the dense legal text, stopping abruptly at the compensation and benefits section. I blinked hard. I rubbed my eyes. I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from extreme sleep deprivation and stress. The base salary was $185,000 a year. I read the number again. $185,000. Right below that staggering figure, there was a guaranteed signing bonus and a relocation stipend totaling $25,000, payable immediately upon signing. I stopped breathing. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. In a single, reality-altering moment, staring at that glowing screen in a quiet office at 3 a.m, my entire worldview fractured and rapidly rearranged itself. Orson, my father, worked a miserable, soul-crushing mid-level management job and made roughly $60,000 a year. The signing bonus alone was almost half of his annual salary. The base pay was more than 3 times what my entire family survived on. It was wealth I couldn't even fathom. Dr. Kismet, I whispered, my voice completely cracking under the weight of the moment. This is a lot of money. It is exactly what you are mathematically worth to them, he said smoothly, picking his pen back up. The catch is you move across the country. You leave everything behind. You start totally fresh. It is demanding, grueling, heartbreaking work. You have exactly 1 week to decide if you want me to send the official paperwork to Human Resources. I didn't need a week. I didn't need a day. I didn't even need 10 seconds. Portland, Oregon. 3,000 miles away from the ridiculous leather binder, from the endless beauty pageants, from the constant, suffocating feeling of never being good enough. I will take it, I said instantly, my voice suddenly rock steady. Dr. Kismet smiled a rare, genuine smile. Good. Keep this completely quiet until the ink is fully dry. In this industry, nothing is real until it's signed and processed. I walked out of his office feeling like I was physically floating above the linoleum floor. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway seemed brighter, warmer. The sterile air felt incredibly light in my lungs. I held a secret in my chest that was so powerful, so immense, it felt radioactive. They thought I would always be the poor, struggling, pathetic nurse they could look down upon and mock. They thought they held all the power and the cards because they had the suburban house, the ridiculous sports car, and the delusional dreams of Hollywood stardom. They had absolutely no idea that I had just quietly secured a future that would entirely eclipse everything they had ever built or dreamed of. The game had fundamentally changed. And I wasn't just going to quietly play my cards, I was going to flip the entire damn table over and watch them scramble. The grueling weeks leading up to the pinning ceremony in May were an absolute masterclass in deception and psychological warfare. I had formally signed the binding contract with the hospital in Portland. The massive $25,000 relocation stipend had successfully cleared and hit my meager student bank account, instantly turning my pitiful 2-digit balance into a staggering number that literally made me dizzy and nauseous every time I opened my mobile banking app. I would open the app just to stare at the comma. But outwardly, I remained exactly the same pathetic Vesper they expected me to be. I still wore my worn-out, taped-up sneakers with holes in the toes. I still loudly ate cheap instant noodles in the break room at work. I still actively let my parents firmly believe I was barely scraping by on pennies. The absolute secrecy was not just a safety precaution to protect my funds, it became my impenetrable armor. Every single time Rowena made a passive-aggressive, sneering comment on the phone about my lack of ambition, every time Orson loudly complained about the exorbitant cost of Delphine's new portfolio headshots, I just vividly pictured that glowing six-figure number in my bank account and smiled a tight, polite, chilling smile. I began systematically dismantling my entire life in the shadows, moving like a ghost through my own existence. I sold my old, beat-up furniture piece by piece on local online marketplaces, meeting strange buyers in well-lit grocery store parking lots late at night. I packed my few meaningful belongings and all my new medical gear into 3 large, sturdy suitcases. I gave my formal 2-week notice at the greasy diner and the campus coffee shop, lying smoothly to my managers that I simply needed uninterrupted time to study for my upcoming licensing exams. I was methodically erasing my footprint from this awful town, ensuring I was leaving absolutely no trace behind for them to follow. Exactly 2 weeks before graduation, my phone vibrated aggressively on my nightstand with a text from Delphine. We rarely spoke directly unless she desperately needed something from me, so I already knew the toxic tone of the message before I even swiped to open it. Hey VS. Mom said you're moving out of your crappy apartment after graduation since your lease is up. I need a place closer to the city center to set up a photo studio and meet photographers. You should talk to your landlord and formally transfer the lease to my name. Also, LA is super expensive and I need new outfits for the Phaedra casting. If you have any spare cash from your waitressing tips for my plane ticket or hotel, send it over. Think of it as a smart investment in my modeling career. Nail polish. I sat on my bare mattress, staring at the brightly lit screen, a cold, dark laugh escaping my lips and echoing in the empty room. The sheer, unadulterated, breathtaking entitlement of it all. She didn't ask how my brutal final exams were going. She didn't even offer a fake apology for skipping my pinning ceremony. She just demanded my apartment lease and my hard-earned money as naturally and easily as drawing breath. A year ago, I might have felt a pang of deep guilt. I might have frantically tried to explain that my apartment was tiny, dangerous, and plagued with toxic black mold, or that I literally didn't have any money to give her. I might have tried to reason with her. But the weak, desperate Vesper who cared about pleasing them died a painful death the exact night Rowena called my graduation a school assembly. I typed my response incredibly carefully. I didn't get angry. I didn't launch into a massive, emotional paragraph explaining my worth or begging for respect. I just sent a single, simple emoji, thumbs up. That was it. A digital thumbs up. Let her interpret that however she wanted in her delusional brain. Let her genuinely think I was meekly agreeing to transfer the lease to her name. Let her think the cash was coming in the mail. I did not care anymore. I was a ghost haunting a miserable life I had already legally and financially abandoned. The morning of the pinning ceremony finally arrived, greeting me with a heavy, overcast, and gloomy gray sky. I woke up at 5 in the morning in a bedroom that was entirely empty save for a cheap sleeping bag on the hardwood floor and my pristine, brilliantly white nursing uniform hanging carefully on the closet door handle. I took a long, scalding hot shower, letting the water wash away the last remnants of sleep and anxiety. I carefully put on the uniform. It was stiff, bright, and symbolized my ultimate survival. I looked at my phone while drinking black coffee. A text from Rowena had come in at 4:30 a.m. Pacific time. At the airport lounge. Delphine is so nervous, but she looks absolutely gorgeous. Have fun at your little ceremony today. Don't forget to call the landlord today about the lease transfer for your sister. She needs to move in next week. Love you. No, we are so proud of you. No, we wish we could be there to see you shine. Just a cruel reminder to serve Delphine's endless needs. I deleted the message instantly. I didn't block their numbers, not quite yet. I needed them to have a front row seat to witness the final, explosive act of this play. I needed them to see exactly who they had discarded and exactly what they had lost forever. I picked up my car keys and walked out of the tiny apartment for the very last time, leaving the brass keys on the kitchen counter for the landlord. My rusted sedan was packed to the absolute brim, the trunk holding everything I owned in the entire world. I drove to the hospital auditorium, parked carefully in the massive concrete garage, and walked slowly toward the building to face the crowds. And that perfectly brings us back to the exact moment in the parking garage. Me, sitting alone in my car, holding the extinguished ceremonial candle, the folded, life-changing contract burning a hole in my uniform pocket, and the tears finally drying on my exhausted face. The immense pain of their absence had peaked, broken like a fever, and left behind a sharp, crystal-clear, unbreakable resolve. I pushed the key into the ignition and started the engine. The old motor rumbled to life, a steady, reliable, comforting sound. I wiped the remaining streaks of mascara from under my eyes and looked dead at myself in the rearview mirror. "You are done," I whispered fiercely to my reflection, my eyes hardening. "You are completely done being invisible." I forcefully put the car in drive. It was time to go meet Aunt Althea for our celebratory dinner. It was time to tell the only person in the world who actually mattered the absolute truth about Portland and the massive amount of money. And it was time to meticulously prepare the ultimate, devastating, public blow for the family that had happily left me behind in the dirt. The transition from the sterile, echoing concrete of the hospital parking garage to the warm, heavily spiced air of the local Thai restaurant felt like crossing the border into an entirely different dimension. I drove away from the hospital with the unsigned contract burning a hole in my pocket, my heart beating in a steady, determined rhythm. I was no longer the weeping girl in the front seat. I was a professional with a six-figure future. I pulled into the small, gravel parking lot of the restaurant just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. Aunt Althea was already there, leaning casually against her battered Subaru, smoking a rare cigarette. When she saw my car, she dropped the cigarette, crushed it under the heel of her worn leather boot, and opened her arms wide. I threw my car into park, practically leaped out, and ran into her embrace. She smelled of wet clay, lavender soap, and the faint, acrid tang of tobacco. She hugged me fiercely, her strong arms wrapping around my shoulders, grounding me to the earth. "You did it, Vesper," she whispered into my hair, her voice thick with raw emotion. "You really did it. You were the loudest person in that entire auditorium, Oi," I said, pulling back and wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "I could hear you over the microphone system." Aunt Althea threw her head back and laughed, a rich, booming sound that made a passing couple turn and stare. "Damn right I was the loudest. I wanted those people to know exactly who you belong to. If your parents want to chase foolish dreams across the country, let them. But I am not letting my niece walk across that stage in silence." We walked inside, the bell above the door chiming brightly. The restaurant was small, intimate, and smelled heavenly of lemongrass, coconut milk, and crushed peanuts. We slid into a corner booth with cracked red vinyl seats. Althea ordered for both of us without even glancing at the sticky menu, 2 massive bowls of spicy panang curry, a plate of fresh spring rolls, and 2 tall glasses of iced tea. For the first 20 minutes, we just talked about the ceremony. We talked about the brutal pharmacology exams I had barely survived, the difficult patients I had grown attached to, and the sheer, overwhelming relief of finally being done with nursing school. But Althea is sharp. She is a woman who has spent decades observing the subtle changes in the clay she molds, and she can read human beings with the exact same terrifying precision. Halfway through her curry, she put down her fork, wiped her mouth with a paper napkin, and fixed her dark eyes on me. The playful warmth in her gaze shifted into something intense and analytical. "All right, Vesper," she said slowly, leaning across the scratched wooden table. "Spill it." I blinked, feigning innocence. "Spill what?" "Do not play dumb with me, kid." She pointed her chopsticks at my chest. "You are sitting here. You just graduated, your parents abandoned you for a fake modeling gig, and yet, you look like you just swallowed a canary. You are vibrating. There is a secret sitting right behind your teeth. What did you do?" I looked down at my plate, a slow, uncontrollable smile spreading across my face. I reached into the deep pocket of my white uniform, pulled out the folded, heavy watermark paper, and slid it across the table. Althea picked it up. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with her thumb. I watched her eyes track back and forth across the page. I watched her read the hospital letterhead, the job title, and finally, the compensation breakdown. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware from the kitchen. When she finally looked up, her eyes were shining with tears, but her mouth was curved into a fierce, predatory smile. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly what this meant for the family dynamic. Portland, she said quietly, tasting the word. Charge Nurse Fellowship. Level 1 Trauma. She looked down at the numbers again. $185,000 a year. Plus a $25,000 signing bonus. I signed it electronically yesterday, I whispered, leaning in so the neighboring tables couldn't hear. The bonus cleared into my account this morning. It's real. It's done. Althea carefully folded the contract and slid it back to me. She didn't tell me I was too young. She didn't tell me it was too far away. She just reached across the table and gripped both of my hands tightly. They have no idea, do they? She asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Not a clue, I replied, the vindication tasting sweeter than the curry. Mom called me this morning asking if I could transfer my apartment lease to Delphine because LA is too expensive. They think I'm still the broke, invisible daughter who is going to scrape by on minimum wage and serve their needs. Let them think it, Althea said fiercely. Let them dig their hole as deep as they possibly can. When do you tell them? Sunday, I said, a cold resolve settling over me. They get back to their hotel from the final casting call on Sunday evening. I am going to call them. Althea nodded slowly. She reached into her worn leather purse sitting beside her on the vinyl bench. She dug around for a moment before pulling out a small, heavy object wrapped in a piece of soft cloth. She placed it in the center of the table and pushed it toward me. I made this for you last month, she said softly. I was going to give it to you when you got your first apartment, but I think you need it right now. I unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a beautiful, handcrafted ceramic compass rose. It was glazed in deep, swirling shades of ocean blue and emerald green, the edges rough and organic. It was stunning. Your parents spent your entire life trying to make you the background scenery for Delphine's show, Althea said, her voice rough with emotion. They tried to tell you which direction to go, what you were worth, and how little you mattered. It is time to guide yourself now, Vesper. You point your compass west, and you do not ever look back. I traced the ceramic grooves with my thumb, the tears I had been holding back finally spilling over. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of profound, overwhelming liberation. Looking at the compass and looking at the woman sitting across from me, I finally understood the greatest truth of my life. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by who shows up for you in the dark. Thank you, I choked out, clutching the compass tightly. We finished our dinner, the atmosphere light and full of electric anticipation. Althea insisted on paying the bill, slapping a $20 tip on the table. We walked out into the cool night air. I hugged her one last time before getting into my packed car. The drive back to my empty apartment felt different. The crippling anxiety was gone. The shadows in my mind had vanished. I placed the ceramic compass in the cup holder of my dashboard. It caught the yellow glow of the streetlights as I drove, a steady reminder of the storm I was about to unleash on Sunday. Sunday evening arrived with a suffocating, heavy tension that settled right in the center of my chest. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my entirely empty apartment, leaning my back against the bare wall. My 3 packed suitcases sat by the front door like silent sentinels. The only thing left in the room was my laptop, resting on my knees, fully charged and connected to the spotty Wi-Fi. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. I opened the video calling application and clicked on the family group chat. The screen rang for a long, agonizing minute before the call connected. The image that appeared on my screen was a stark contrast to my empty, echoing room. My parents were sitting on the edge of a king-size bed in a lavish hotel room in Los Angeles. The background featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, thick velvet curtains, and room service trays piled high with half-eaten expensive pastries. Orson looked exhausted, his tie loosened, rubbing his temples. Rowena looked frantic, her makeup slightly smudged, tapping her manicured nails aggressively against her phone case. Vesper, finally, Rowena snapped the moment the video stabilized. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how my pinning ceremony went. We have been dealing with an absolute nightmare here. Hello, Mom. Hi, Dad, I said evenly, keeping my face entirely devoid of emotion. How is the casting? It is a bureaucratic mess, Orson groaned, leaning back into the pillows. These industry people have zero respect for our time. Delphine has been waiting in the lobby for 6 hours just to be seen by the secondary assistants. The expenses are piling up rapidly. The valet parking alone is $50 a night. Which brings us to why we needed you to answer your phone earlier, Rowena interrupted, leaning closer to the camera. Her eyes were sharp, evaluating me. We need a temporary bridge loan, Vesper. The hotel required a massive incidental deposit that we weren't expecting, and your father's credit card got flagged. We need you to wire us $1,000 right now to cover the rest of the trip and Delphine's emergency wardrobe changes. I sat in the silence of my empty room, the glow of the screen illuminating the cold reality of my existence to them. $1,000. They were staying in a luxury suite, ordering room service, and they wanted me, the daughter they abandoned, to wire them my non-existent waitress tips to fund their delusion. I took a deep breath. The air in my lungs felt incredibly light. No, I said. Just one word. A single syllable. But the impact on the video call was instantaneous and explosive. Rowena stopped tapping her nails. Orson sat up straight, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Excuse me. Rowena's voice dropped an octave, lacing with a dangerous, threatening tone I had feared my entire childhood. What did you just say to me? I said no, I repeated, my voice steady, calm, and utterly devoid of fear. I am not sending you $1,000. I am not sending you $10. I am not funding this trip. Vesper, you listen to me, Orson warned, his face flushing red. This is not a request. This is family business. We are in a bind. You work 2 jobs, you live in a cheap apartment, you have savings. You need to step up for your sister. When she gets this contract, she will pay you back tenfold. I don't have a cheap apartment anymore, I said smoothly, picking up my phone and preparing the digital documents. My lease is over. I moved all my things out this weekend. And I won't be transferring the lease to Delphine, either. Rowena gasped loudly, pressing a hand to her chest. Are you insane? Where are you going to live? How are you going to survive? You just graduated nursing school, Vesper. You make $12 an hour steaming milk. You cannot afford to throw tantrums and ruin your sister's living arrangements. I am moving to Oregon, I announced. The words hung in the digital space, heavy and final. Tomorrow morning. I am leaving this state. The silence on the other end of the line was profoundly satisfying. Orson blinked rapidly, as if trying to translate my English into a language he understood. Oregon. Rowena scoffed, a harsh, mocking sound. What is in Oregon? Another minimum wage job? Vesper, stop acting like a petulant child just because we missed your little ceremony. You are a brand new, inexperienced nurse. You will be wiping beds and taking vital signs for pennies. You need your family. You need to stay close. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply opened the digital PDF file on my laptop, clicked share screen, and enlarged the document so it filled their entire view. I won't be wiping beds, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. I accepted a position as the charge nurse fellow for the Level 1 Trauma Center in Portland. I start next week. I watched their small faces in the corner of my screen. I watched them squint to read the shared document. I watched Orson's eyes scan the hospital letterhead, the prestigious title, and finally, slide down to the compensation section. I watched the exact moment my father realized the number on the screen was not a typo. Base salary, Orson read aloud, his voice trembling so violently it cracked. 100, $185,000. Vesper, what is this? It's my contract, Dad, I replied, ending the screen share so I could see their faces clearly again. Rowena looked like she had just been physically struck by a freight train. Her mouth hung open. The arrogant, condescending sneer had vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. 185,000? Rowena choked out, her hands shaking as she grabbed the phone closer. That's impossible. Nurses do not make that kind of money straight out of school. You're lying. This is a fake document you made to get back at us. The $25,000 signing bonus cleared into my bank account yesterday morning, I said, pulling up my banking app and flashing the screen to the camera for 3 seconds. Just long enough for them to see the comma and the 6 digits. It is very real. I am fully financially independent. I make triple what you make, Dad. And I did it entirely by myself. Orson stuttered, his face pale and slick with sudden sweat. The reality of their financial situation, the maxed-out credit cards, the predatory car loan, the expensive hotel, was colliding violently with the realization that the daughter they had treated like a peasant was now sitting on a small fortune. Vesper, honey, Orson suddenly said, his tone shifting gears so fast it caused whiplash. The anger was gone, replaced by a sickening, desperate fawning. This is incredible news. We had no idea. We are so proud of you. Look, since you have the bonus money, you can definitely help us out with the hotel bill. Just a few thousand to float us until we get home. We're family. I stared at him. I looked at the man who had bought a $45,000 car for his delusional younger daughter while I was eating instant noodles and choosing between shampoo and conditioner. No, I said, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. I told you. I am not funding this trip. Before Orson could launch into another desperate plea, the hotel room door behind them burst open with a loud, violent bang. The real chaos was just about to begin. Delphine stormed into the hotel room frame, looking like a hurricane had dragged her backward through a designer boutique. Her expensive hair extensions were tangled, her makeup was running in dark streaks down her face, and she was clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her manicured hand. She threw her designer purse violently across the room. It smashed into a table lamp, shattering the bulb. It's a scam, Delphine shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical, completely ignoring the fact that my parents were on a video call with me. The whole thing is a massive, disgusting scam. Rowena dropped the phone onto the bed, the camera angle shifting wildly, so I was looking up at the ceiling and the frantic movements of my family. I muted my microphone and sat back, watching the magnificent disaster unfold in real time. What do you mean it's a scam, sweetheart? Calm down, Orson yelled, rushing toward her. Phaedra isn't even here. Delphine sobbed, collapsing onto the velvet armchair. The agency doesn't exist. It was a front to collect the $3,000 portfolio review fees from all the girls in the lobby. When we finally got to the front of the line, it was just a guy in a rented conference room telling us we needed to buy his mandatory photography package to proceed. I watched Rowena stagger backward as if she had been shot. No, we paid the review fee online. We paid the agency fees. The flights, the hotel. Orson, how much did we put on the new card? 15,000, Orson whispered, his voice utterly broken. We borrowed $15,000 for this week. They kicked me out. Delphine wailed, kicking her shoes off. I told the guy he was a fraud and he called security on me. He told me I had zero talent and nothing but pure delusion. My career is ruined before it even started. The sheer irony of the situation was a masterpiece written by the universe itself. They had skipped my legitimate, life-changing graduation, a ceremony celebrating a very real, tangible career, to fly across the country and hand $15,000 of borrowed money to a con artist selling a fake dream. The crushing weight of their financial ruin settled over the hotel room like a thick fog. Rowena suddenly scrambled back to the bed and snatched up the phone, bringing my face back into view. Her eyes were wild, bloodshot, and frantic with panic. Vesper, Rowena gasped, her voice trembling with raw desperation. Vesper, did you hear that? We have been robbed. We have been scammed. We are $15,000 in the hole and the credit card is maxed out. You have to wire us that bonus money. You have to save us. If we default on this card, we lose the house. I looked at the woman who had used my honor roll certificate as scrap paper. I looked at the woman who had called my nursing degree a school assembly. I am so sorry to hear that, Mom, I said smoothly, my tone dripping with professional, clinical detachment. That sounds like a terrible investment. You should really be more careful with your finances. Investment. Delphine shrieked from the background, suddenly realizing who they were talking to. She lunged for the phone, her tear-streaked face filling the screen. What money? What bonus? Give me the money, Vesper. I need a new agent. I don't have any money for you, Delphine, I said calmly. I earned a $25,000 signing bonus for a trauma nursing position in Oregon, and it is sitting in a locked account under my name. Delphine's jaw dropped. The realization that the sister she had mocked and belittled her entire life was now wealthy while she was drowning in debt short-circuited her brain. You're lying. You're a broke waitress. You're lying to make me feel bad. Watch Facebook in 5 minutes, I said coldly. Without waiting for another word of their screaming, I reached forward and abruptly ended the video call. The screen went black. The silence in my apartment returned, peaceful and profoundly heavy. I picked up my smartphone. It was time for the final nail in the coffin. I opened my photo gallery and selected the picture Aunt Althea had taken of me earlier that day. In the photo, I was standing in front of the hospital, wearing my pristine white uniform, the shiny new medical pin gleaming on my lapel. Behind me, parked perfectly in the background, was the brand new, sensible, all-wheel drive SUV I had purchased with a small portion of my bonus to handle the mountain roads of the Pacific Northwest. I looked strong. I looked wealthy. I looked undeniably successful. I uploaded the photo to all my social media accounts. I didn't write a long, emotional paragraph complaining about my family. I didn't mention their scam. I kept it ruthlessly professional and devastatingly simple. Officially a registered nurse. Humbled and honored to announce I have accepted the position of ICU Charge Nurse Fellow at the Level 1 Trauma Center in Portland, Oregon. 6 figures, a new city, and a beautiful new start. Thank you to the medical directors for this incredible $185,000 opportunity. Wheels up tomorrow. I hit post. I then navigated to the official hospital page, which had already posted a welcoming announcement about the new fellowship cohort, featuring my name at the top of the list. I shared their post to my timeline. Then I sat back against the wall and watched the digital explosion. For the first 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the notifications began. First a trickle, then a massive, unstoppable flood. Ping, ping, ping. My phone vibrated violently against the floorboards. 40 notifications turned into 100. 100 turned into 300. Former high school classmates, distant relatives, coworkers from the diner, everyone was liking, commenting, and sharing. And then, the direct messages started pouring in from the family members who had spent years ignoring my existence. My phone rang. It was Aunt Zinnia, my mother's younger sister, a woman who notoriously gossiped about everyone and heavily favored Delphine. I let it ring out. My phone rang again. It was my cousin Mark. Ignored. My screen lit up with a barrage of frantic text messages from Orson. Vesper, take that post down. People are calling us asking why we aren't celebrating with you. Vesper, please answer the phone. We need that money. We are stranded in LA. Vesper, your mother is having a panic attack. Call an ambulance. I sat there, watching the screen light up the dark room, a cold, unyielding wall of ice surrounding my heart. My phone was blowing up with nearly 400 messages. The relatives who had called me a background character were now frantically trying to align themselves with the new millionaire in the family. The parents who had discarded me were now begging on their digital knees. But I wasn't going to answer. I wasn't going to rescue them. I had one final thing left to do before I left this town forever, and it required absolute silence. The aftermath of my social media reveal was a spectacular, chaotic symphony of desperation. By Monday morning, my phone had become a radioactive brick of notifications. The power dynamic, which had been rigidly set in stone since the day I was born, had violently flipped overnight. I was no longer the desperate daughter begging for crumbs of affection. I was the bank. I was the authority. I was the untouchable figure at the top of the mountain, looking down at the wreckage they had created. I woke up at dawn, rolled up my sleeping bag, and carried it down to my brand new SUV. The crisp morning air felt electric against my skin. As I was securing the last suitcase in the trunk, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a local number I recognized as Aunt Zinnia's landline. I decided it was time to answer, just to establish the permanent boundaries of my new kingdom. "Hello, Zinnia," I answered, leaning against the cold metal of my car. "Vesper. Oh my God, you finally answered." Aunt Zinnia shrieked, her voice laced with that fake, breathless concern favored by toxic relatives. "Honey, what on earth is going on? Your mother called me at 3 in the morning sobbing hysterically. She said you were hoarding a massive payout and refusing to help them pay for their hotel in California? They are stranded." The credit card company froze their accounts. "They aren't stranded, Zinnia," I replied calmly, examining my fingernails. "They have return tickets booked for tomorrow. They just have to eat hotel lobby apples until then." "I am not a bank." "How can you be so utterly heartless?" she exploded, instantly dropping the fake concern. The flying monkey routine had begun. "They are your parents. They raised you. They fed you. You just signed a contract for nearly $200,000, you ungrateful brat. You can afford to throw them a lifeline. Delphine's career is ruined and they are $15,000 in debt." "They chose to go into debt," I stated, my voice as hard as diamond. "They chose to fly across the country for a scam instead of attending my graduation. They chose to buy Delphine a $45,000 car while I was eating instant noodles. I bought every single grain of rice I consumed for the last 3 years, Zinnia. Don't you dare try to play the morality card with me. You are destroying this family over a petty grudge," she yelled. "No," I corrected her smoothly. "I am simply refusing to fund their delusions anymore. If you care so deeply about their hotel bill, Zinnia, you wire them the money. Have a nice life." I ended the call and immediately blocked her number. It felt remarkably easy, like taking off a heavy, suffocating winter coat. A few minutes later, Orson called. I answered, putting him on speakerphone while I adjusted the driver's seat. "Vesper," Orson's voice was hoarse, defeated, and devoid of all his usual arrogant bluster. He sounded like a broken old man. "Please, don't hang up. The hotel manager is threatening to call the police because our card declined for the room service charges Delphine ordered last night. We literally do not have the funds to check out." I paused, my hand resting on the leather steering wheel. For a fraction of a second, the biological programming of a child wanting to save their father flickered in my brain. But then I remembered the leather binder. I remembered the scrap paper. "Dad," I said softly, almost gently, "you have spent the last decade investing every ounce of your money, your time, and your love into Delphine's career. You proudly told the neighbors she was your retirement plan. You told me she was the ticket to a better life. Vesper, please, she was scammed. We were stupid. You weren't stupid, Dad. You were blind. You made your investment. Now you get to live with the returns. I am not a part of your financial portfolio. To you, I was just a ghost in the hallway. Treat me like a ghost now." "We are your family," he sobbed, a pathetic, wet sound. "You cannot just abandon us when you have the means to save us. It's evil." "You abandoned me in a parking garage on the proudest day of my life," I replied, the ice returning to my veins. "Good luck in Los Angeles, Orson. Do not call this number again." I hung up. I went into my phone settings and blocked my father. I blocked my mother. I blocked Delphine. I blocked every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had ever looked the other way while I was pushed into the shadows. The only contact left unblocked from my old life was Aunt Althea. I sat in the driver's seat of my new car, surrounded by the quiet hum of the engine, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The digital tether was severed. I was completely, undeniably free. The power shift was absolute. They were trapped in a city they couldn't afford, drowning in debt they couldn't pay, holding onto a golden child who had zero talent and zero prospects. And I was driving into a sunrise holding a contract that guaranteed my security for the rest of my life. If you've ever cut ties with toxic loved ones to protect yourself, or if you feel satisfied with how Vesper handled this situation, please leave a comment below. Sometimes, cold rejection is the most powerful form of self-protection. Let's see how Vesper turns a new page in her life in the final part. The drive out of my hometown was the most surreal experience of my life. I navigated the familiar, potholed streets one last time, passing the diner where I had scrubbed floors, the library where I had cried over anatomy textbooks, and the discount pharmacy where I had meticulously counted out pennies for shampoo. It all looked incredibly small in the rearview mirror. It looked like a movie set that I had finally outgrown. I merged onto the interstate highway, pointing the heavy nose of the SUV westward. The morning sun was just beginning to crest over the horizon, flooding the cabin of the car with brilliant, warm, golden light. Sitting directly in the center console cup holder was the ceramic compass Aunt Althea had made for me. The deep blue glaze caught the sunlight, sparkling like a tiny ocean. I drove for hours without turning on the radio, just listening to the rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt. The geography slowly changed outside my window. The cramped suburban strip malls gave way to vast, rolling plains and, eventually, the majestic, terrifying silhouettes of mountains I had only ever seen in glossy magazines. Around noon on the second day of driving, I pulled into a massive, dusty truck stop somewhere near the border of Idaho. I filled the tank with premium gas, not even checking the price per gallon, a luxury that still felt incredibly foreign to me, and bought a terrible, burnt coffee from the convenience store. I walked out to the edge of the parking lot, leaned against the hood of my car, and stared out at a horizon I did not recognize. The wind was cold and smelled of pine trees and freedom. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, and for the first time in 24 years, I felt something I had been waiting my entire life to feel. I felt like myself. Completely, quietly, and uninterruptedly myself. I was no longer the invisible daughter who wasn't pretty enough or loud enough. I was no longer the miserable scapegoat who faded into the margins of the family portrait. I was no longer the desperate student making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for her. I was Vesper, a trauma nurse, a survivor. A woman standing on a highway, going exactly where she chose to go. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It was a text message from Aunt Althea. Just got a frantic call from your grandmother. Apparently, Orson had to call his boss and beg for a payroll advance to pay the hotel bill so they wouldn't get arrested. They're driving back cross-country in a cheap rental car because they couldn't afford new flights. Keep driving, kiddo. The air is better out west. Love you. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached my eyes. I typed back, the air is perfect out here. Tell Grandma I say hi. See you at Thanksgiving. I put the phone back in my pocket. I heard through the grapevine much later, through an email from Althea, the ultimate fate of my family. The beautiful, brand-new sports car was violently repossessed by the bank after 3 months of missed payments. The precious leather binder full of casting calls was thrown into the trash. Delphine, the supposed golden ticket to Hollywood, is currently working as a cashier at a local discount grocery store to help pay off the monstrous credit card debt they incurred on her behalf. Her modeling career died in that rented conference room in Los Angeles. Every once in a while, maybe twice a year, my mother manages to bypass my block list by using a new prepaid phone number. She leaves long, weeping, dramatic voicemails on my phone. She talks about how much she misses her successful, beautiful daughter, how empty the house feels, and how she hopes I will fly them out to Oregon for a vacation so they can see my new luxury apartment. I have never deleted a single one of those voicemails. I keep them saved in a hidden folder on my phone. But I have also never listened to them past the first 5 seconds. I don't need to. I know the script. I know the manipulation. Some people on the internet, the flying monkeys and the self-righteous strangers who grew up in functional, loving homes, tell me I am too cold. They tell me that family is blood, that forgiveness is a virtue, and that I have won the game, so I should be the bigger person and throw them a lifeline. They say my retaliation was too calculated, too devastating. But as I stood there in the parking lot, looking at the ceramic compass guiding my way west, I knew the absolute truth. You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm, especially when they were the ones who handed you the matches and told you to burn. I cut off my entire biological family to protect the life I built from the ground up. I left them to drown in the exact same ocean of debt and delusion they created, while I walked away with everything I rightfully earned. I don't feel a single ounce of guilt. I don't regret it for a fraction of a second. But I leave the final verdict to you, the jury of the internet. Tell me, am I wrong? Thank you so much for watching and staying with me through this incredible 3,000-mile journey. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to fight for your own worth in the shadow of a toxic family, please hit the subscribe button and leave a like. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Vesper was justified, or did she go too far? Remember, you never have to hold a candle for people who prefer the dark. See you in the next story.